Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the program, A Journey Through Nature and Science. I'm your host, Don Murphy. And with us today, we have Erica Elliott. Erica is a medical doctor in Santa Fe, New Mexico, with patients from across the United States. She's lived in a whole bunch of different countries over the years. Her father was a general in the United States Army during World War II, if I'm getting that right. She'll correct me if I'm wrong. And she speaks a number of languages from Swiss and French and Spanish and German as well. Her adult life began as a school teacher on the Navajo Reservation in the early 1970s. She then joined the Peace Corps as a volunteer in South America. That's what we have in common. She was in Ecuador, and I lived in Ecuador for the past 10 years, and she lived in and visited many of the same places that I lived and became my stomping ground over the 10 years that I was in Ecuador. But she was a bilingual educator there. She got into high altitude mountain climbing in the Andes, which I never did. Not at 60 years old. I wasn't about to climb some of the highest mountains in the world, but she did that as a young woman. And later, she became an outward bound instructor in the Colorado Rockies. She helped found a co-housing community in Santa Fe called the Commons. And her life has really been a mythic journey of wonderment and life-changing experiences, which you're going to hear all about, including a couple of major medical disasters, which ultimately led her to finding her life's purpose, which is really service to others. You're going to hear about that in particular. She now describes herself as a medical detective, diagnosing and finding a cure for maladies that other doctors can't seem to help with. So Erica, Dr. Erica Elliott, welcome to the program. I'm so excited to have you with us today.
I'm excited to be here, Dawn.
Yeah, so cool. So why don't we start off with you telling us what started you on your life's journey? I mean, it seems to be one of a search for spirit, purpose, and meaning, and really interested in finding out what was the spark that started you off on this journey.
Well, when I was a little girl, I never told anybody this because I was afraid they'd think I was a nerd or something, but I always thought there was something more to life than just going to school, coming home and playing, and then doing homework and then having dinner and then go to bed. I just thought I thought there's got to be something else that I'm supposed to be doing something. I don't know what it is. And so then I just put that idea on the back burner.
Did
And
it
boy,
manifest in maybe you asking questions like, why is the moon following us? Or,
I
uh,
asked all exactly, Dawn. I was a question act. I asked so many questions that it got on people's nerves. What?
right.
Why is the moon exactly like what you said? In fact, I think I asked that exact question. Why are
Yeah.
things so? I was constantly saying, "Why is this happening? Why is that?" I was incredibly inquisitive, but I had to, dial it down so it didn't get on people's nerves. And,
Yeah, I understand.
but I always thought there was something behind what we were actually seeing. There
Mhm.
was way more to life than what we were seeing. I had that feeling really strong, but there was nobody I could talk to about that
Mhm.
because
Did you ask your dad some of those questions, or your mom? I mean, I wore my dad out. I mean, I was lucky that he read the science section of the New York Times religiously, so he actually could answer most of my questions, which I thought was amazing now that I look back on it.
there's no way my mother could answer my questions. And my father would give me some kind of answer just to shut me up, you
Uh,
know. And so
placate you.
yeah, to placate me, oh, just go to bed now. It's so so yeah, and so I kept looking, thinking I want to know more things about how this world works and stuff. And I was sure there was more than what I was seeing. I couldn't explain it.
Right.
It's just a very strong intuition I had that we're not seeing everything that's really out there. And
Right.
we're living in a small box. And I actually had those thoughts as a girl, but again, I couldn't share it with anybody. So there was a part of me that was very social, and everybody thought I fit in no matter where I was. But then
Mhm.
there was a part of me that was really lonely because I could fit in anywhere, but it wasn't my authentic self. And
Right.
so
Understand.
I felt really alone
Mm.
in some of my thoughts.
But
And
you didn't think of it in terms of an authentic self at the time, did you? I
oh
mean, that's
no, no,
something you
no,
came
no,
to
I didn't.
later.
That was
Right.
much later. The only thing I thought, but I had trouble finding words for it. It was just a feeling that there's more to this life. That's as far as it went. There's more to this life, and that's it. And
Right.
um, and then when I had a breakdown in college, people think, "Oh, how awful! You had a breakdown. That's really terrible." Well, that's what I thought too. This is really terrible. This is so humiliating. And I was forced to see a psychiatrist at college. And I actually, it was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. And if I
Mm.
hadn't had that breakdown, I can't imagine who I would be. I'd probably be some professor at a well-known school getting high honors and actually miserable, totally miserable. and so
Right.
and so I'm so grateful I'm grateful for my bad experiences, and that ended up becoming my motto: never waste a bad experience, because I sure
Well,
have.
that's true. I mean, in your memoirs, and I read a couple of your books and your memoirs. You certainly mention a number, unabashedly, I might add, a number of the bad experiences that you had that influenced your life, and I guess cumulatively, all of these led, to the person you are today, but advanced you on your journey. And particularly, you already mentioned college. In particular, I mean, you were married at a very young age in college. You were what, at Antioch College
Yeah,
in Ohio, married at a young age. You chronicle how you went through this whole psychoanalysis with the psychiatrist, and so how did that particular? I'm really interested in understanding because these things seem to happen incrementally. How that particular experience then advanced, this sense of wondering that there must be more. What's going
yeah.
on.
Well, so the psychiatrist was a very unusual man. He was the first Black psychiatrist to graduate from the University of Zurich in Switzerland, where my mother graduated, coincidentally, being
Mhm.
Swiss. And he was the college psychiatrist, and he was very handsome. And felt so humiliated to be there. I mean, back in those days, only like schizophrenic people and people in mental hospitals saw psychiatrists back in those days. So I felt so full of shame and embarrassment. I couldn't even look at him the first time.
Mhm.
I just looked at the ground and cried because I felt mortified that this is what's become of me. What a mess. And so anyway, he was different from any psychiatrist I've ever heard of. He
Mhm.
treated me in a way I'd never been treated in my life. He treated me with huge respect and kindness without judgment. I had always been judged all my life.
Mhm.
And it was so moving to have somebody treat me like that and to hold the space. And he didn't tell me what to do or what to think or what to conclude. He listened with such respect that it allowed me to see myself in a totally different light. And he
Mhm.
would only say things that when I get really off the path to sort of guide me. Like, I'll give you an example. He'd say, "Now tell me again, why is it that you think you're stupid when all your professors give you these rave reviews and stuff like
Mhm.
that?" And I say, "Well, because my brother called me stupid."
Mhm.
And he said, "You know, children are very literal. They don't they take everything at its word." I mean, that's just one of many examples of how he
Mhm.
clarified how how much my childhood damaged me, and I
Right.
had a very bad image of myself. I thought I
So
was.
this was really a an opportunity for the beginning of self-discovery. And it
It,
was rooted in respect
yeah.
and the lack of judgment. So in your journey getting to communicate with another human being that respected you and then lacked judging you facilitated the beginning of self discovery.
Yeah, I think if it hadn't been him, if it had been some other psychiatrist, we'd be going around in circles,
Mhm.
analyzing stuff and this and that. He was one in a million. I mean,
Right.
and I feel like that's when my real authentic life began. That
Hmm.
was the real me. He helped me find the real, true me, and it's not
Hmm.
who I thought I was at all,
Right.
at all. And I learned for the first time to have love for myself and
Hmm.
appreciation and compassion for what I'd lived through as a child, all the
Hmm.
harsh upbringing. And
Right.
that in turn allowed me to have loving, compassionate thoughts about others. So
Well,
how yeah, go ahead.
speaking of those loving and compassionate thoughts, do you think that's what led you? And I want to go on to this next, phase that I understand that was important in your life. And you just mentioned the love and compassion and the respect that that led you to have for others. So you ended up on the Navajo reservation
Yeah.
as a bilingual teacher. So do you connect the two? That experience you had with your psychiatrist, your sense of self-discovery, and then where that led you to
Oh,
next.
yes, because if I had not had the breakdown and not seen Dr. Samuels, that's not his real name, and
Mhm.
so I might slip and accidentally use his real name, but, I would be on an intellectual tract. That's what they
Mhm.
expected, all and be some professor somewhere. And
Mhm.
but this way, thanks to Dr. Samuels, I was liberated from all
Mhm.
those expectations, and I was
Mhm.
free to
Right.
make my own decisions in alignment with my spirit and my soul. And I didn't want to be a professor. I didn't want to go down that road. I wanted
Mhm.
to do something that fulfilled my soul and my spirit, and not just have a good facade so all the neighbors say, "Wow, your daughter's amazing." That's what they wanted. Your
Right.
daughter's really amazing. I let
Right.
go of all that. That was
Well, you let go
that
of it,
was
and
harmful.
you let go of it, and you ended up on the Navajo reservation as a bilingual teacher. And there's some fantastic stories that I want our listeners to hear about of your experience there. And I want to rush to say that we're using the word Navajo, and they call themselves the Dine people. If I'm saying that right, I hope. Uh,
Diné, Diné.
Diné.
And the reason why I still call them Navajo, I'm not being disrespectful, it's because that was the term everybody used when I lived there. So it
Mhm.
helps me get into that whole space of, it helps me relive those times. If I say Diné, that's a more modern time. And
Mhm.
so I'm not being disrespectful.
Right. No, I understand. So, you had a relative, I think a sister that had a relationship with the Peace Corps um,
Yeah.
that ended up kind of guiding you in that direction. What were you thinking?
The Peace Corps. Well, when I was at Antioch College, and I was getting a tour of the place, they had a huge forest that was deeded by one of the alumni, and there was some activity going on, like ropes courses and all this stuff. And I said, "What's happening here?" And they said, "This is what they do to train to go into the Peace Corps." That's all long past. That was in the '60s. They did that. They don't do that anymore. And I asked, what's it about? And I had talked to my sister who worked in the Peace Corps office in Washington D.C., and she told me how these people who signed up for the Peace Corps had such an incredibly exciting experience, and she had thought about joining, but she thinks about a lot of things and never follows through. And
Right.
I'm a follow througher, and so
Right.
I always had it in the back of my mind. And then when I decided that if I didn't leave the reservation, now they call it the Navajo Nation, if I didn't leave after the 2.5 years there, I would probably end up marrying my boyfriend, Marshall Tom, and have 6 children and live there the rest of my life. And I knew that that wasn't my destiny. I could, picture that, but I thought this isn't my path. This isn't my
Right.
path. And so it was really heartbreaking when I said I was leaving, when this
Right.
family that had kind of adopted me, they didn't really speak English, and I herded sheep for a summer with them to perfect my Navajo. And when it was time to leave, and they said, "Where are you going?" I said, "Back to my my family." And they said, "Your family's here," because it's
Mm.
like nothing existed before I came to the reservation. It's like they never asked me about my prior life. It was like here forward. And so saying I was going back to my family was very confusing. And then there was a long silence, and then the old man said, "Where's your family?" And I didn't know how to say New Hampshire, so I said, "They're near the big water where the sun comes up." And anyway, it was traumatic saying
Right.
separating and saying goodbye. It was really rough. But I wanted to learn more about indigenous people all over the world. And I'd
Mhm.
always thought about the Peace Corps. And when I um, got accepted, I was very excited and about being high in the Andes and
Right.
so forth.
Well, let's back up for a minute because you were on the Navajo reservation for quite some time and had some interesting experiences there, both with a mountain lion. And I was talking earlier about the fact that we've had so many of the same experiences. I had many experiences with mountain lions, not a spiritual one like you had that you'll talk about in just a minute. And then there were peyote ceremonies that you were able to be a part of that led you to some deeper understanding of human beings in a more mythical or mystical, I should say, religious sense. Could you tell us a little bit about how those experiences came about? And I mean, you can just describe them anecdotally, however you'd like.
Well, we'll start with the mountain lion because what happened, that story ended up being a thread throughout all 3 memoirs. I'm working on my third memoir, and it's a thread all the way through that binds all 3 memoirs.
Mhm.
And so here's the story. I I'm a nature lover. I just and you are too. And
Mhm.
so I went off by myself. They were horrified that I did all this stuff by myself, the Navajo people. But I just wanted to commune with nature. I wanted silence. I was passionately in love with nature. And so I
Mhm.
drove way into the middle of nowhere in a wilderness area in Utah where there's no habitation. It's very remote. It's just a long dirt road to get into where I went. And it was just absolutely stunning, just gorgeous. And so, and I had no fear. Maybe I should have had fear, but the love of nature blotted out any fear I might have had. And so
Mhm.
when night came, it was a full moon, so I could see pretty well. And I just laid my sleeping bag on the sandstone rock. I found a
Mhm.
flat area, and so I didn't use a tent or anything because I wanted to just get as close to nature all around me as I could. And
Mhm.
I fell asleep, and sometime in the night, I had this very, very vivid dream that I could smell the billy goats on in the Navajo Nation. Every family had sheep and goats, and in my dream, I was helping to herd them into a corral. And the billy goats, it was time for mating, so they had a really strong scent called pheromones that attract females. And the smell was so overwhelming to me that I thought, is this really a dream? I mean, it seems so real. And then I heard a sniffing, and I opened my eyes, and there, a few inches from my face, was the tawny, whiskered face of a mountain lion smelling me. And I thought, I am going to have a heart attack and die right here before. And so I I became paralyzed with fear. And from a white person's perspective, who would make sense out of all this, they would say, because you were paralyzed with fear and didn't try and push him away, he wasn't interested in you because you didn't move. They're not interested in things that don't move. They want to chase something or bat something around. So I was so terrified that I didn't open my eyes till the sun was high in the sky. And of course, the mountain lion was long gone, and there was no footprint because I was on sandstone. But when I stuffed my sleeping bag into the sack, the pheromone, the very acrid smell, went up my nose, and I felt a chill go up my spine. That was the smell of the mountain lion. And
Mhm.
so I ask all kinds of people, like forest rangers and biologists, why didn't the lion eat me, kill me? And they all said the same thing. It's because you didn't move. And then one of the teacher aides, the Navajo teacher aides, had a grandmother in Canyon de Chelly, one of the most beautiful places on earth.
Sure.
Have you
Mhm.
been there?
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
of course.
So back then you could go anywhere in the canyon, you didn't have to have a guide. And she took me on the weekend to see the grandmother, and she told the grandmother the story that I had told her about the mountain lion. And the grandmother, smoking a corncob pipe, very wizened, full of wrinkles. She thought about it. She was silent for a long time. And then she said, she looked right at me and said, the in Navajo, and which the teacher aide um, translated for me because I was pretty new to the reservation then and hadn't really learned Navajo. And she said, the mountain lion is your spirit guide, and he's there to share his strength and perseverance and courage, which you will need because you will face some big obstacles. And if they don't kill you, you will have powerful medicine to bring to the people. Ooh. And so I just wrote all that down in my diary and then forgot about it. But somehow it seeped into my whole being because it became the thread through the trajectory of my life.
Yeah, that's amazing. I know you had many other experiences on the reservation as well, and one that stood out in your memoirs had to do with the peyote ceremonies, and which later, um, think it was after you visited the reservation a second time, or maybe it was the first time, the peyote ceremony that led to the prediction about your marriage and the birth of your
Oh,
son.
that was years later when I was a doctor. I went back to
Right,
treat Navajo
right,
people as a
right.
doctor, and yeah, so they want when my time was up, they wanted to give me a thank you present, and they asked me what I'd like, and if in the peyote ceremony, they said, "What should we pray for?" And I didn't know what they should pray for, so I just glibly said peace and happiness. And that doesn't mean anything to Navajo, a traditional Navajo. That's just vague concepts. They
Right.
needed something concrete, but I was just being glib. And when I was in the ceremony, I had forgotten a lot of my Navajo because this is years later, but I
Mhm.
could understand how they interpreted peace and happiness. How they interpreted it when they prayed fervently for me was having a baby. That was the first wish. The
Mhm.
next was having land. And the next one
Mhm.
was having a home. And the last one was a husband. And it was in that order. And then I thought to myself, oh, they're dreaming. I'm too
Mhm.
old. I'm 40. There's no way I'm going to get pregnant. Number two, I
Mhm.
don't have any boyfriend. Number three, I can't afford buying land and building a house. So this is completely out of the question. 9 months later, I had, or um, quite a 10 months or so, I don't remember. I had, oh, 9 months. Yeah, I was pregnant and I met this guy at the clinic, and normally I didn't have any kind of sparks with my patients at all. And
Mhm.
so right after this, this guy who worked with the Forest Service came and he had a sprained ankle. And I remember when I was holding his ankle, I felt like lightning bolts. I thought, what is happening? This just doesn't happen to me. I'm just
Right.
not like this. And so that was really weird. And I got pregnant against all odds, and we decided to try and make a go of it. We weren't suited for each other at all, but we decided to give it a go. So he bought some land out outs uh, outside of Santa Fe, and we built a home, and then we got married. So it was just exactly how they said it.
In that peyote ceremony. But you
Yeah.
also earlier described these peyote ceremonies. Most people think, you're taking and smoking a drug, but this for the um, Navajo is really a religious experience, and they're part of a traditional
Oh,
religion
yeah.
ritual that the Navajos experience.
Yes. Yes. It's very religious. It's very spiritual. It's not about getting high. In fact, they
Mhm.
are pissed off at people who use their sacred medicine, that's what they call it. Their sacred
Mhm.
medicine just to get high and have a good time. They really
Right.
don't endorse that at all. They
Understand.
they look
No, I
down
thought
on
that
it.
was really important to communicate. But back to the Peace Corps. I mean, so many generations of young people join the Peace Corps. I mean, either looking for adventure or in search of themselves, and that sort of thing. In your case, you ended up high in the Andes, and it led to, one of, I think, at least to me, it was one of the most exciting experiences that anyone could undergo, and that was climbing these mountains and these volcanoes in Ecuador. And of course, it means more to me because I lived there and I
Yeah.
know most of those volcanoes. And while I didn't, summit any of them by any means, I certainly hiked most of them. So I'm interested in you telling our listeners exactly how that happened, and once again, why, other than the old cliched answer, well, it's there, so why not climb it? Why in the world would you get involved in climbing some of these dangerous volcanoes?
Everybody asked me that question. Believe me, everybody who knows me has asked the exact same question. What
I'm sure.
possessed you? What in the world? So this is how it happened. So when we got there was 3 months of training to train us to be in the Peace Corps, to speak Spanish, and teach us about the culture and so forth. So most of those classes I could skip because I spoke completely fluent Spanish from having lived for a while, a semester at San Miguel de Allende in Mexico. And so they said I can do what I want during that time. So I would wander around Quito,
Hmm.
just exploring. It was so interesting looking at the cathedrals and stuff. And one day, it was usually overcast. Remember that? It was overcast a lot. But
Sure.
one day I was walking and the sky, the clouds parted, and I saw this apparition, this huge cone shaped volcano and covered with snow. It was absolutely like looking at heaven or something. I was totally taken by it. And a man came up to me. He saw that I was dumbstruck by, and he said, "That's the highest active volcano in the world. And its name is Cotopaxi." This was all in Spanish.
Hmm.
And I said, "Do people climb that?" And he said, "Oh, only the experts." And I said, "Do women climb it?" He said, "Oh, no, 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 they don't do things like that. No, absolutely not. No." And I said, "Well, what men climb it?" And he said, "Well, there's a climbing club that's part of the Polytechnical Institute." And the Polytechnical Institute was like the MIT of Ecuador. And so I said, they have a climbing club? Like, and he said, "Yes, but it's all men." And I said, "Where is this place?" And he wrote down the address and he said, "But it's for only men." I said, "Okay, thank you." And then I went and found that address, and the woman said they have their meetings on Saturday, and she told me what time. So the next Saturday, I showed up. I
Hmm.
can't believe me sometimes what I do. I actually, because I don't always play by the rules, some wonderful things have happened. If I totally played by the rules, I'd miss out on a lot. And
Right.
so when they looked at me, everybody turned around to look at me, and I said, "I'd like to join your climbing club." And the room went really silent, and then they started asking me questions. And then I realized they don't really view like American women as real women because we don't walk around with a man. We um we don't wear dresses and stuff like that. So we were kind of different kind of creatures. And so maybe that's why they even considered accepting me, even though I wasn't a man. And so they asked me for about what experience I had climbing. And so I listed all these mountains, which by their standards are complete anthills, like Mount Washington, Mount Jefferson, Mount Davis. I really climbed all those, but they're nothing. And
Hmm.
so, and I used the wrong word, not intentionally. I used the word climb them instead of hiking. And so I
Hmm.
gave the impression that I was an experienced climber, which wasn't true. I was an experienced hiker. And so they said, "What equipment do you have?" And I said, "Well, I'm with the Peace Corps and I just have my sleeping bag and down jacket and boots, and that's all." And they said, "Well, we can share equipment with you. We're going to climb Cotopaxi." I said, "Oh, I'd love to go with you." And they said, "Well, first we have to go to the glacier and see what you know and try out the equipment that we're going to lend you." So they went out to the glacier and they discovered I didn't know anything. I didn't know how to put on crampons. I didn't know how to tie knots. I didn't know how to hold the ice axe properly. And so they walked away from me and made a little huddle. And I thought, "Oh my God, what have I done? I'm really in trouble now. They're going to be so mad at me. They're just going to leave me here. And then a jaguar from the jungle is going to come and eat me up. And my poor parents, they'll never know what happened to me. I really made a huge mistake. Oh God, what's going to happen now?" And one of the men came back smiling, shook my hand, and he says, "I'm going to teach you everything I know." And that's how it started. And
Right. But
they taught me so well that I became just one of the guys. I mean, they
right.
treated me just not like they would treat their women. They
But
like,
you also became quite famous because you climbed some of the
yeah,
highest peaks, the first woman there
yeah. I
as
was the
well.
first woman, American woman rather, not the first woman, the first American woman who had documented proof to reach the
Hmm.
summit of the highest mountain in the Western Hemisphere, which is 26,000 feet. And I have a
Right.
peak named after me. It's not the mountain. The mountain
Hmm.
has about 7 peaks, and there's
Good.
one that had never been climbed. And I did that. And then the climbing club gave it my name, Pico
Right.
Erika Elliot.
Well, in the beginning of this, though, I mean, kind of continuing this thread of self-discovery and that sort of thing, and I've certainly had this experience as a lover of nature as well. You see these mountains, and many of my colleagues, who were rangers and conservationists and lovers of nature who've summited, high mountains, the feeling is almost inexplicable when you see a mountain. You do think of it as somewhat celestial, and there's somewhat of a marriage of the spirit of the mountain with your spirit that's somewhat inexplicable. And this kind of harks back to the beginning of your, personal or self journey where you're questioning that there has to be more to life. And in that regard, you see something like a mountain peak like that, and I think deep within yourself, you're like, there's something to be discovered there and understood. But at the time, you don't realize that it's nothing there that's to be understood as something in here
You're
inside
right on.
yourself.
You're absolutely right on. You expressed that perfectly. That's exactly
Mhm.
right. Exactly
Right.
right.
And that's an amazing part of the story, and we're going to have up on the screen later on as we continue discussing this, how people can read your memoir and get a little bit more detail, because we can talk about each and every one of these segments forever, and we're going to run out of time before we know it. And because that's just the way these these things go. So it, I guess now I'm interested. You're a doctor now. I mean, you made this transition. You're in the Peace Corps. You're uh, teaching Spanish to the Quechua people. That's the language that they speak. That's kind of an ancient language that goes all the way back to the Inca, and some of the indigenous people still speak that language. Many of them still, of course, speak that language in Ecuador. So you go through that experience, and there are many things that you chronicle in your memoir. Again, that I really encourage people to read, and then you decide to go back to the United States, and somehow you end up in medicine. How did that happen?
Okay, so okay, so I came back and like per, some person asked me to join his master's program in experiential education. I thought, well, maybe that's what I'm supposed to be doing because um, I saw what can happen to people, like they're transformed in nature. Nature is very healing, hugely healing.
Mhm.
So I thought maybe this is my destiny. I don't know, but maybe I'll try it out. And then I taught for Outward Bound, and that was profound seeing these huge transformations in these kids. I had two gang members. And by the end of the trip, they were like heroes. People adored them. And my secret was I didn't allow any of them to say anything about their past. They could only say their first name, not their age, not where they're from, nothing, nothing. And that was a lifesaver because these people ended up adoring these gang members because they were so helpful. And and they treated them like heroes, and which changed their lives. And
Right.
like one of them wanted to open his own hour bound school for gang members. I mean, it brought me to tears when we sit around the fire and we talk about, the day and how they felt and stuff like that. And there was a gay guy that finally confessed. That was a big thing back in those days around the
Mhm.
fire that he was gay. And the way people were supportive of him. I mean, I was in those fire circles, I was in tears the whole time because they were so deeply moving, people sharing from the heart. So I thought, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. But then I had gone my whole life with this misperception, and I got this misperception from visiting my uncle in Switzerland, who was a true genius. He was the only physician I really ever knew, and people said, "Are you going to come and be a doctor and come work with your uncle?" And I remember saying when I was like 21, I said, "Oh no, he's a genius. I'm not a genius. So that being a doctor is out." And so
Know the feeling.
and yet that's in my DNA. I come from three lineages. I'm, I mean, 3 generations rather. And so I didn't even consider it. And then I decided, since I tested out of all my requirements at science requirements at Antioch, I decided I needed to get updated on what's happening in science. So I signed up, this in Boulder, Colorado, for advanced placement chemistry and biology. And I discovered that every single person except for me was pre-med. And I thought, I had an epiphany. Oh my God, these people who are aspiring doctors are not geniuses. They're not even that smart. They know how to memorize, and they
Right.
know how to take standardized tests. And I thought, I can memorize too. I've had to memorize lots of stuff in my life. Like when I was in first grade in England, I
Right.
had to memorize a long poem, even though I didn't even know what it meant. And
Right.
so these people didn't have critical thinking. They didn't, say, why is this so and why is that so? They just memorized and spit it back. And I thought, oh my God, I can do this. And so then then I don't know if I should tell it how the story ended, but, or just let them find out.
Sure you should.
Should I tell? Okay, so I went to the advisor that all those pre-med students went to, and I told him I wanted to go to med school. And he said he had all my records and everything to prepare for the visit, and he said, you have an impressive um, dossier,
Background.
but I think you shouldn't apply to med school. I said, why not? And he said, well, first of all, you're too old. I was 29. Back then, back then things were really different. And he said, second, you're a woman. Back then it was very hard for women to get in.
Right.
Third, you really don't have a science background. I said, that's because I tested out of it at college. And then he said something, a fourth thing that um, I can't remember. And he said, "You've done so many things that how are you going to convince um, people that you're going to stick with medicine?" Anyway, so that gave me even more motivation. So I applied to Stanford, the University of Colorado, and to Dartmouth. And and because he said I was too old, I took the MCATs, the tests you get to,
Yeah, the medical college admission test.
yeah, and so, I took it before it had the courses, so I literally just guessed on 50% of them, and
Mm.
I somehow got the national average, and, the people at Stanford, the admission person, called me up against all odds and said, "We'd like to interview you. Can you come to um, Stanford and we'll set up a time?" And I said, I can't do that because, I was in the Peace Corps and I made $120 a month. I don't have the money to stay in a hotel and buy nice clothes and pay for the airplane. Can you come out here?" So, like I said, I broke all the rules, and so he was a long silence, and then I said, "Well, I realized I'd said something wrong." So I started talking really fast. "Well, if you came out here, I used to teach Trout Bound and I have all this equipment and I could take you cross country." I was talking really fast so it wouldn't hang up. "And I could
Right,
take you to the Rocky Mountain National Park and we could sit on a log and eat our lunch and you could interview me then. You'd have the time of your life." Silence. Then he said, "I'll get back with you." And when I told my classmates, one of the guys said, "Are you out of your mind?
fine.
He's never going to call you back. You really messed that up." And so he said, just take out a loan and buy some nice clothes and play by the rules, for God's sakes." He did
Right,
call me back. And he said he talked to his people on the team and they decided that I was so unusual that Stanford actually was looking for about 1% of its student body to be, quote, out of the box so that
right,
it would impregnate them with new ideas. And so
right.
he came out anyway, and we had exactly that. He interviewed me on a log in the sun in the snow in with the Rocky Mountains all around, and he said it was the best interview he'd ever had in his life. But
Great.
he said I'll make you a deal, and he said, if you finish your courses the way you're supposed to and follow the rules and retake your MCAT scores, then and if you get in the top 10%, you're in and it'll be all expenses paid. And I said, that's great. But then after he left, I thought, wow, if I don't get in the top 10%, then I've wasted all those years. And the advisor said I was already too old. So and then right then, University of Colorado said they wanted to interview me, and they said, "We'll take you. You don't have to repeat your MCATs. Just finish finish all your studies, and then you're in. And
Right,
we'll deal with the costs because we know you don't have any money, and we'll take care of that."
right. So you got to be a doctor, and now here you are in life, and we're gonna have just a few more minutes here, but I wanted to get to the part where you are kind of a medical detective, and you're, you know, um, I don't know how many people ever watch that TV show Doctor House, where he's
Oh
a
yeah.
diagnostician and diagnosing all of these weird diseases. But you make me think of him anyway,
Okay,
and
but my book 4 is called Medical Detective: Simple Solutions for Solving Medical Mysteries. But I say this is not like the New York Times. This is not difficult cases. This is this is not like genetic problems or weird syndromes. These are ordinary things that are missed by all these specialists. Why? Because they don't take the time to even interview the patient, and so I have like a toolbox I use, and so it helps me figure out, like a guy who'd been to he's a wealthy businessman from San Francisco. He'd been to, I don't, countless specialists for his huge list of problems: headaches, fatigue, mood disorder, rashes, tired all the time, couldn't think clearly, just wanted to sleep all the time. And so And so he came to me out of desperation. His mother had heard about me and referred him to me. So he flew out, and in 10 minutes, I told him what was wrong. And it was so simple. It was so simple. All these famous specialists didn't didn't even really try to figure it out. And they
Mhm.
just gave him pills for all the symptoms. So here's his story. I said, I do everything by timeline, like a real detective. I said, when did
Mhm.
you start feeling bad? He said, well, I don't know exactly. They all say the same thing. It's a very similar interview. I don't really
Right.
remember. Well, try to remember. Okay, I think it was the winter of uh, 2018, I think. And say, okay, so let's do a timeline 2018, sometime in the winter. Yeah. Okay. And so you were fine? He said, yeah, it was great before then. I was surfing and doing all this stuff, running my business, very successful. And then I just started getting sicker and sicker. I said, okay, we're going to operate under the principle that everything happens for a reason. So our job is to try and find that reason. Even if we can't find it, we have to try. So, what changed in that period of time? They always say nothing. I said, okay, I'm going to sit here and quiz you. Did you travel abroad? No. Did you change your diet? No. Did you have emotional problems, girlfriend, money? No. Um, uh, then, then I was kind of stuck. And then I said, something different happened. Can, can, are you sure nothing different happened? And he said, no, I can't think of anything. And then I said, did you move somewhere? He said, oh yeah, yeah. That's when I moved to a townhouse in San Francisco, to rent. And I said, so that's when you started feeling bad. And he said, yeah. And I said, was there any water leaks in the house in the past? And he said, well, how would I know that? And I said, well, there'd be stains on the wall or buckling paint or something, or maybe some black stuff or green stuff around the windows. He said, oh, yeah, it's everywhere. I said, Wyatt, you have mold poisoning. It's the mycotoxins, which are deadly chemicals that are making
Mhm.
you sick, and you have to get out of there. And then we can make a plan for how you're going to get well. That took 10 minutes. And
Mhm.
now he's so excited. He feels so good after a year of implementing the Get Well program. He's better than he ever was in his life. Meaning,
Mhm.
when you're stripped down, when you have a disaster, you have a chance to rebuild yourself in alignment to what is right and good and uh, for your body and your soul. So he ended up eating impeccably, living like an impeccable lifestyle. And he says he's had more energy than he's ever had in his life. And
Mhm.
so that that's what the book is about. I mean, these are
Right.
not difficult
And
problems,
you
but
have many examples in your book about these sorts of things, correct?
many,
Right.
countless. I mean, I have so many stories that I'm going to have trouble whittling down which stories to pick because
Well, let's wrap up with something that happened to you medically because I mentioned it in the
okay.
beginning, and I don't want my listeners to think that I've mentioned something and we're not going to talk about it.
Oh,
And
okay.
you had something really serious happen to you
Seriously,
medically,
some
which
very
again contributed to who you ended up becoming.
that's exactly right. Because again, never waste a bad experience. So I had a really bad experience and nobody could help me. Nobody. I was in this new building and it was corporate medicine, which I was very reluctant because it's like being on a factory belt, like you're
Sure.
like a robot just giving pills and not really understanding the person or taking a
Sure.
proper history. It was pretty awful. And I did it because I was desperate. I was a single parent. I needed to be home at 5 to take care of my child. I needed not to work on weekends. I needed not to be delivering babies all night. So I made a deal with the devil and worked in a kind of system that seemed heartless to me. But I hung in there because I had to. I felt I had
Mhm.
to. But I got sicker and sicker and sicker, and nobody could help me. Here I was a world class athlete, and now I could barely get through the day. I was so tired, so foggy brained. I
Mhm.
was total mess. I'm writing it in book 3. And nobody really knew how bad I was because you couldn't see it. They say you have such nice rosy cheeks. They didn't realize I was in a full reaction to something, and
Right.
they had no idea. And and I had to be a medical detective for myself because I thought if I don't figure this out, I'm going to die because
Mhm.
I'm getting worse and worse and worse. Well, it turned out the building was completely toxic. It was a brand new building, outgassing these horrible chemicals with new carpet, outgassing terrible chemicals. They sprayed for pesticides once a month for bugs that didn't exist, and they used a pesticide that's now banned for indoor use because it's known to cause brain damage, and my brain was
Mhm.
damaged. And um and and they use awful cleaning stuff, and they used fabric softener and air fresheners, and the ventilation was poor. So I had to quit, and I thought my life was over. And anyway, long story short, in order to get well, I had to learn stuff you never learn in medical school: nutrition, allergies, heavy metals, toxic chemicals, Lyme disease, parasites. You don't learn any of that stuff. And that's what's going on in our modern life. And so
Mhm.
all of a sudden, I had patients from all over the place. And pretty soon I had a full practice, and I wasn't even well yet. I was still brain damaged, but they didn't care. They wanted
Mhm.
somebody to listen to them. And they, as I got well, they got well too because I learned more and more and more to get myself well, and then used it on them. And then I had this devoted following of way too many patients, and even some came from Europe. And now they don't because they have doctors like
Mhm.
me. Okay, and I just want you to know that I feel really comfortable talking with you. I feel like I can say anything and it's okay.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad you feel that way. It makes me feel good that I'm hosting this correctly. And there are a whole host of things that I didn't even mention to our listeners that we have in common, as well as my living in Santa Fe for a while, and being on some of the same mountains that you've been on there, and some of the other experiences that you. Okay, everyone, we're back with Dr. Erica Elliott after taking a brief break here, and we're going to continue our conversation, and we're going to circle back to a couple of things we only touched on lightly, that I'd really like to hear from Dr. Elliott about. And the first one really has to do with the mountain climbing experience she had during her time in the Peace Corps in Ecuador. She was the first woman to summit one of the highest, first American woman, that is, to summit one of the highest peaks in Ecuador. And she did
In the
so
Western Hemisphere, in the
in,
whole Western Hemisphere.
well, in the whole Western Hemisphere, but that included in Ecuador, of course.
Yeah.
But in the whole Western Hemisphere. And so, Erica, why don't you tell us a little bit about how that came about? I do remember talking with you about it, and you told us a little bit about the men that you met, and how what trepidation you felt when they were getting ready to discuss whether or not they were going to include you in their first trip up the mountain. And but I want to hear a little bit more from you about what that experience was like for you personally, and how it might have guided you on your way for the rest of your life.
Well, one thing for your listeners to know is that I had a very good relationship with my father, because when he'd come back from this and that maneuver or so forth, he wanted to go out into the wilderness and climb and hike and stuff. And I was the only athlete in the whole family out of 6 children. And so
Mm-hmm.
I benefited from that time with him enormously because he treated me like I was his buddy, not
Mm-hmm.
like I was a girl or not a girl or whatever. He treated me like I was his outdoor buddy. And so he gave me the impression that I could do anything guys do because I'm with my father and he's a guy. And so I never thought twice. Like going to medical school too, they said, oh, you'll never get in. It's really hard for women and stuff like that. That didn't faze me at all. And when it was all men climbing club, that didn't faze me either. People say,
Mhm.
how could you do something like that? Do an all male climbing club and just be part of it and do what they do. And so yeah, it didn't faze me at all, and it never has in my life. And
Yeah, and I understand that part, but what was it like for you on physically on that mountain, knowing that you could die at any minute, faced with crossing crevasses and being in the freezing cold, not being acclimatized at all. Those had to all be psychological and physiological challenges that you went through.
okay, my biggest terror was my first climb with them because I had misled them, not totally on purpose, that I knew more than I really did. And so I was really scared because now I had to, measure up. And it I didn't know if I was going to make it or not. I mean, it was everybody else was acclimatized. I wasn't. I mean, I came from low altitude in the U.S. And this was some of the highest altitude in the world, and I was panting and so forth. And the climber who sort of adopted me, I became his project. He was determined he was going to teach me everything he knew about climbing, and he was one of the best climbers in Ecuador. He and along with his best friend,
Mhm.
and
Now,
it,
this was Jorge, who you mentioned in your book, is that
yes,
right?
yeah. I changed his name, but yeah, it's
Mhm.
Jorge. And so he taught me how to breathe right. And everything he taught me, I interpret it sort of like metaphors in life. Like he said, climbers, beginner climbers, they start climbing very fast and then they completely burn out and they have to keep resting. And that's not how you do it. How you do it is you take a pace that you can maintain for 12 hours. I said, oh my God. So that would be really slow. And he said, doesn't matter. That's what you do. So you get to the top. Otherwise, you're not in good shape and you're not going to make it to the top unless you do these things I'm telling you. And I translate all that to life in general. My whole experience on the mountain was a metaphor for how to deal with life and how to deal with reaching whatever I was trying to reach in life and how to be brave and how it's okay to be scared, but then you just keep going.
Well, did you think about these things prospectively or just in retrospect? In other words, when you got done climbing or when you were, living your life, did you think back on these experiences and draw upon what you had learned on the mountain?
Totally, totally. But it's not like while he was doing it, while um, while Jorge was telling me these things, I wasn't going to say, "Oh, I'm going to apply these all to my life." It's sort of afterwards when I was thinking about the whole experience, like when we finally got back to Quito, I would think, "Gosh, these are really important things that don't really just apply to the mountain." But while I was on the mountain, I wasn't thinking like that at
Sure.
all. I was just trying to survive.
Yeah. Well, what was the most dangerous experience that you were trying to survive? And I know you talk about this a little bit in your memoirs, but what
Oh,
was
well, this
the
was Cotopaxi. This was the first big mountain, the highest active volcano in the world. And I so I was a complete beginner. And so everything was terrifying. The most terrifying thing was looking at those crevasses and thinking if I slipped and I fell in one of those, I'd never be seen again until the ice melted, like 100 years later or something. Yeah, so that was terrifying. And Jorge would just say, keep breathing. And I use that to this day, his saying, keep breathing.
Mhm.
And he said, stop holding your breath. And that's
Mhm.
what I do when I'm scared. I hold my breath. He was so tuned in to all these things that I needed to do to help me get to the top of the mountain.
Mhm. Well, it's interesting you mentioned breathing. For some reason, it's hard for human beings. They do the opposite when they should be breathing. And I've noticed that even in bodybuilding and weightlifting, when I would act as a spotter for somebody that was a novice, it's almost like I had to yell at them to get them to remember to breathe,
He
you
yelled at
know.
he yelled at me. He yelled at me quite a bit. So, why did he yell at me? Because he felt responsible for me. He
Right,
was scared that I was going to get hurt, and so
right,
that's why he was kind of very stern with
right.
me. And
But you made it.
I made it. Oh my God. And then I had to come down. I had no energy to come down. So they taught me how to glissade. It's like making yourself into a toboggan. But that was terrifying too, because you go so fast. And so they taught me how to arrest with the ice axe, so I wouldn't go so fast I'd end up in a crevasse. But
Mhm.
that was pretty scary. And but I was so tired I could barely walk. And so I the parts that were smooth, I just glissaded like a toboggan.
So that your first experience, of course, was on Cotopaxi. And for those
Yeah.
that haven't been to Quito, the capital city of Ecuador, it's a very prominent volcano that you can see on clear days. It's spectacular. It's one of the most beautiful scenes in the world. And Quito itself is a the city, Old Town Quito is a World Heritage Site. And so you have this juxtaposition of this ancient volcano that is just so beautiful, juxtaposed against this old city. It's one of the most beautiful places in the world. You're lucky you get a chance to spend it there, even though that was terrifying. I mean, you could have just sat back and looked at the mountain and enjoyed yourself instead of putting your life in danger.
I could have, but that wouldn't have been me at all. It's,
Right.
I had some of my father in me that, oh, you can do it. Come on, you know. Um, so yeah, my father had a huge influence on me. He didn't intend to. It just all that
Sure.
time we spent together really influenced me a lot.
No, I understand. And of course, Cotopaxi wasn't your only mountain. You ended up ascending a few other mountains there in Ecuador as well.
Lots of them. Chimborazo, Antisana, Ilenica, etc.
Mhm.
Lots of.
Yeah, Nantisana is one of the most beautiful of the volcanoes, especially when you get out in the Paramo and
Oh,
you're looking across the Paramo and for our listeners, when you go on our website, we'll have a blog page for this particular episode. I'll put up some shots of Cotopaxi, Antisana, and Chimborazo, and some of the other mountains that you climb, so people can see what you actually experienced,
yeah.
uh,
Thank you.
which will be great. And you had some other, really fascinating experiences as you were trying to understand, the spirit, purpose, and meaning behind life. You were on the Navajo reservation with the Dene people, and you were fortunate to be involved in their spiritual ceremonies involving peyote,
Yeah.
which they were allowed to do legally.
Yeah, but I
Uh,
wasn't legal.
and there's
It
some,
was
yes, you were
illegal for me.
breaking the law as
I was
usual
breaking.
on your adventures. So, but nonetheless, they covered for you, and you were involved in those very spiritual ceremonies. But now you're a doctor, and my question is from kind of a medical, physiological point of view, mind-altering point of view. Um, you're involved in the spiritual ceremony. Your mind is being altered by this external, substance. How do you explain that, or how do you view that both as someone that experienced that? very spiritual experience, and then who is now a doctor who deals with people's physiological ailments and sometimes their psychological ailments. What's your perspective on that?
Okay, I had a certain perspective up to a point, and then a physicist, quantum physicist in the audience, gave me a different perspective. My perspective up to that point on all psychotropic drugs was that it somehow, and I just make up a story, I don't know how, it altered the chemistry in the brain to allow you to perceive things in a different way. I can't tell you more than that because I don't know. But then when I gave a reading for my first memoir, um, Medicine and Miracles in the High Desert, My Life Among the Navajo People, everybody in the audience wanted to know um, how that happened. Those things happened that they're hard to believe. And I found it hard to believe, but I lived it. So, and they told me it was real. And like speaking fluent Navajo, when I had not been there very long, and I can only say a few things like "Chadena na," "the Nachai," how old are you? Where do you come from? How many sheep do you have? I couldn't say much at all. So,
Mhm,
and so, or be quiet, children, because I was a
mhm,
school teacher, and so during the ceremony, I started talking in Navajo. When it was my turn, we went around and we first had the sacred tobacco gotten from the San Francisco Peaks, which is now a ski area, unfortunately. But you'd go like this, inhale, exhale, and you'd say a prayer. And my Navajo mother, I was sort of, quote, adopted by several families. And this was a peyote family that adopted me and invited me to the ceremony. And so my Navajo mother whispered in English, just pass it on. And I didn't pass it on. I did what everybody else did. And then I said a prayer. I never
mhm,
heard of this prayer before. I was speaking fluent Navajo. And part of me, I had two voices inside of me, not literally, but that were dueling it out for who was telling the truth. And one voice said, "This isn't real. This is what the drug does. It makes you think it's real. It's just a hallucination." And the other said, "It is real and it's more real than real life. This is really happening." And they go back and forth while I was praying and everything. So I had a lot going on. And then when the same thing happened when the water drum, which is a metal bowl with a hide stretched, and it makes an ethereal sound, like totally otherworldly, and it goes past, and you drum, and then you sing a peyote song, and the Navajo mother said the same thing. Just pass it on, and I
mhm,
didn't. I drummed, and I sang a song I never heard before. Hey ne young yo hey yo hey ne young hey yeah, and it went on and on, and I had that same argument inside me,
mhm.
and I don't know, I thought, well, it sure feels real to me, and so and then, and so then afterwards, when the ceremony was over, we filed out um, clockwise, and then we touched the earth with our forehead, and we fanned ourselves with the eagle feather fan, and then we went to the neighboring cinder block house where women had stayed up all night making a feast, and they had a sheet on the floor, on the dirt floor, and we sat down, and there was mutton stew and fry bread and canned peaches and stuff, and so we were eating, and all of a sudden the roadman, which is the word for medicine man, when it's a peyote ceremony, you don't call it medicine man. Medicine man is traditional Navajo culture. Peyote is not traditional. It comes from the plains Indians during a time of terrible sorrow and murdering of their people. and how they one of the ways they survived is with the peyote ceremonies because their tribe was being decimated. But pretty soon, years later, the peyote ceremony started to spread to other tribes like the Navajo, the Dene.
Mhm.
And so as we're eating, the roadman looked at me right in the eyes, and Dene people don't usually do that. They don't look you right in the eyes unless you're really close friends or something, or you're angry. And so he was looking at me right in my eyes, and it felt kind of uncomfortable. And he started speaking to me in Navajo, and I had no idea what he's saying. The peyote had worn off long ago, and I felt myself really blush, and my face got really warm. And I said, excuse me, I, I don't speak Navajo. And everybody burst out laughing. And he said, "You sure talked up a storm last night." So, you mean it really happened? You betcha. So
Right.
oh my God. And other things happened too. That was just the first. And then, this miraculous healing that I don't know if you want me to go into that, but that's just totally mind blowing.
Right. I know you talk about that. I'll save some of those things, get people to read your memoir so they can read
Okay.
about your
Okay.
miraculous healing as a result of the peyote ceremonies as well. But, as a doctor now, have you ever investigated, physiologically what might have gone on or what goes on with these psychotropic drugs and,
Yes,
why, or do you care?
I I care a little bit because there's parts of me. There's the part that doesn't care because I know it really happened, and I know it made me have access to things I don't have access to.
Mhm.
And like the quantum physicist in the audience, when the people said, How do you explain this?" And I said, "I'm going to be honest with you. I could make up a story about the chemistry and so forth, but to tell you the truth, really, I don't know what happened." And this guy said, I think I know what happened. And he stood up and he said, "I'm a quantum physicist, and it's easy for me to understand what happened because of quantum physics." He said, he said, you were in a state, the peyote, I guess, the chemistry of the peyote caused you to be able to experience life outside the box that we live in. And we have to live in this box because if we didn't live in this box, it could make us go crazy because we'd have access to everything out there. And when babies are born, right from the start, they start pruning those neurons that could give us access outside the box, but then you couldn't function. Everything be happening at once and stuff. So you have to function. So the body does this pruning business. So you're able to have a regular life and not be overwhelmed by having access to all of reality. And he says
Mhm.
it's not hard for me to understand that and explain. And while this peyote allowed you out of the box, and when you're out of the box, you have access to anything out there. The past, the present, the future, it's all out there for you to access, but we can't access it unless we have these altered experiences.
No, I understand. My son and I have these discussions all the time. I'm a very strong, skeptic. I don't like doing anything that alters my mind. And not because I'm what you would call totally against it or judgmental about it. I come at it from the perspective that I believe the human mind has, tremendous capacity and capability within the context of the reality in which we live. And I don't think it needs to be altered chemically for us to, you know, experience miracles or experience fantastic things, because I've experienced fantastic, wonderful mind-blowing things,
Yeah,
without, mind-altering, drugs.
there
And I
are
have these
people.
discussions with my friends all the time, especially my son, who, likes to indulge in mushrooms and these
Uh,
button mushrooms and things. And he does it, not on a regular basis, but more like the Navajo people do in a very, controlled and
yeah,
spiritual sense.
right. But you're fortunate that you can access all these quote miracles. Not every Joe Blow can do that. And so you are extremely fortunate. And I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I could share some things or one thing in particular on this podcast, but I think they would shut me down and, put me in a mental institution if I started sharing some of my experiences. And some of them are quite serious. That's why I wouldn't share them on publicly on a podcast like this because they involve other people and public circumstances that would be difficult for most people to digest. But yeah, I believe the mind is capable of accessing some pretty awesome stuff out there.
yeah, and so I'm not into drugs at all, by the way. That was just part of being part of their culture kind of thing, participating.
Um,
That's not really who I am at all. But however, I've had some really unexplainable things happen to me that had nothing to do with drugs. I mean, and it happens really frequently. I'll just give you one very common example. Probably lots of people have this. I'll suddenly think of somebody I hadn't thought about in maybe 10 years, and all of a sudden I'll get a phone call from them. I mean, that happens a lot. It's so, people say, how do you explain it? And, I, I don't know, but it's not from drugs, that's for sure. It's
right.
not from
No,
drugs.
I understand. Well, let's move on from the peyote. That's and people can read more about this in your memoirs. I really encourage people to get a copy of that. Absolutely. We began this discussion talking about your search for spirit, purpose, and meaning, and this tremendous desire that you had or feeling that there had to be something else out there, some purpose or meaning to life. And I guess my question to get to the heart of that that we kind of touched on offline is if you were diagnosed with a terminal illness with only a few weeks left to live, do you feel you've got it all figured out? Would you be, joyful and happy and grateful for having lived and understood what life is all about?
Yes. Now, I'm not allowed to talk about this subject to my son. He says, Mom, please, can we change the subject? I can't stand it when you talk about death. And I said, Barrett, the reason why it's not like I love to talk about death. I just want to assure you that when it's my time to die, when it's my time, it's not like I want to die right now. When it's my time to die, I just want you to know you don't have to feel sad for me. It's okay to feel sad for yourself, but I'm actually, I know this sounds crazy, this is me talking to him, but I'm actually kind of um excited about going to the other side. He said, "Oh,
Right.
Mom, can we can we stop talking about this?"
Well, but I mean, if you had to sum it up in a nutshell, what is this, what understanding have you come to about life? Why do you feel that way? I mean, as you talk to yourself or sit in a sense of wonderment, what do you tell yourself about what it's all been about?
That I've followed my path and
Mm,
I found my purpose, and I have helped many people who couldn't find any help anywhere. That's my fourth book about teaching the reader how to. It's pretty easy to solve some of these problems that all these specialists can't solve because of the way medicine is practiced. And I mean, I have led such a full and fulfilling life. I don't have any regrets. I
mhm,
don't have any regrets. I haven't harmed anybody. I don't need to if I needed to apologize, I've already done it. Like
mhm,
reconciling with my mother, that was hugely healing. I'm healed. and and
Mhm,
so I don't have unfinished business. So I mean, I love being alive. That's
mhm,
it's not to say I want to die, but when it's
mhm,
my time, nobody needs to mourn for me.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, it's this sense of being grateful, I think, and realizing that every breath, or at least for me, that every breath you take is a miracle.
I
And I don't know, and I bet you have had this experience. And I just found out from a longtime friend of mine. He posted this on Facebook. It was a Japanese saying, and of course, I'm gonna forget what the Japanese word for it is, but there's a Japanese word for this, and and I'll just describe my experience. But it's waking up in the middle of the night and, you know, being in a total darkness. And sometimes I'm standing up and you're overwhelmed with the sense of the presence of the universe and um, the wonder of it all. And for me, I actually articulate this out loud sometimes. I just go, how can this all be? And
yeah,
I just look around and I shake my head out. How can this possibly be?
I have that
And
in
there's
me.
a word for that, but I don't know what it is.
It's not konnichiwa, it's not arigato, it's not sayonara, I don't know either. Um, but I have moments like that when I'm alone in nature. I just feel like, oh my God,
Mhm.
it's so beyond words.
Mhm.
It's so
Yeah,
moves me
it,
so deeply.
it is. And I think, knowing being deeply in touch, with reality, whether it's when you're in nature or when you're in darkness, the poet Rilke often just explored darkness. And some of his poems, it's almost like he's celebrating darkness where most people don't understand, but a lot of Native American cultures do. They understand the power of silence. They understand the
Oh yeah,
power of darkness
mhm,
and what we would call loneliness,
yeah.
but just being in the present and being in the now. And sometimes it's dark and you're lonely, but then you feel the power of the entire universe, if that makes any sense.
Oh yeah, indigenous people. I mean, the really traditional ones, which is you don't find it as much anymore. But when I was there, there's still a lot of most of the people were still traditional, and and they had that sense that you're talking about. It was it was part of their life.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Um, so someone once said to me, and I think I shared this with you earlier, and we can almost wrap up on this, although I do want to circle back to one other thing. And that was this sense that someone said to me that the worst part of living to them would be to die without having known why they were alive. And um, And when I discussed this with them or talked even to myself about that, that concept, they were, I think, trying to express what you began your journey with of how frustrating it would be to go through this life and not
Yeah, just
having
like
known why you were alive.
right. Yeah, yeah, yes. I know. I wonder why I had such a strong feeling. My siblings didn't have that feeling. I wonder I wonder why. But it was so strong, and I couldn't really share it with anybody because 'cause I'd sound like I was, I don't know, from a different planet. But I thought there's got to be some purpose to my life. I don't wanna just go through life and then do this and that and then die. It just
Right.
seems like such a waste.
No, I understand. The final thing, you have done so many interesting things, and you also talk about in your memoirs how you established this housing co-op,
Yeah.
this community. I was interested because you don't call it a commune.
no, it's
although
not.
that's
It's not.
or anything like that. And
No.
so I got the impression it was something more and more important to you than that. How did that come about, and how does this community that you live in work?
Okay, so I did a TED talk on it. Your listeners could find it. It's TEDx ABQ Albuquerque, and then co-housing, and then my name, and it explains how it came about. it I lived in this. I was a single parent, and I lived in this beautiful uh, tract of land outside of Santa Fe near El Dorado, and I just thought, I have this lovely home and this lovely land, and something doesn't feel right at all to me. And I miss the tribal feeling I had in other cultures. You're part of a tribe. I'm not part of any tribe. And it felt like awful to raise my son like this, and where he's not like in a village or something like this.
Mhm.
Um, And so I heard about this meeting in town, and I went to it, and it sounded really exciting what they had planned. And I went to the site where they were thinking of doing it, and I thought, oh, this is so ugly. It's just all cactus. And the architect said, you have no imagination. It's going to be absolutely gorgeous. You can't you don't know how to project ahead. I said, no, I guess I don't. I kind of limited in that area because it looks just awful to me. It's just dirt and cactus, and but it's a gorgeous location right on the Santa Fe River, and some hills behind us with gorgeous views and stuff. And I said, also, I'm scared because I'm a single parent, and it's one earner in the family, and I'm going to make this big leap and build a home here. Um, and what if we don't get along? And what if this happens and that happens? It's really scary for me. And finally, the architect, who we became very close friends and we co-authored a book together, How to Build Healthy Homes, um, she talked me into it. She was a single mother too. She said, when she reminded me this would be a fabulous place to raise your son. He'd be surrounded by community. He'd have all these elders to learn from. He'd have kids to play with. He'd be safe. There's no cars in there. They have to park on the outside. So he could run around and play, and even unsupervised and so forth. So she talked me into it, and I think it's one of the best decisions I ever made. I mean, but we had to learn to live together. I talk about this in the TED Talk. It wasn't all just hunky dory and we're best friends. It wasn't like that at all.
Well,
America,
tell us the name of the community again.
the Commons, the
Mhm.
Commons on West Alameda, the
Mhm.
Commons on West Alameda.
Right.
And it's 28 families that live together. It's not a commune at all. It's
Mhm.
not. It's like an old-fashioned neighborhood,
Mhm.
very old-fashioned, where people help each other out. They live close together. They share gardens and so forth. And it doesn't mean you have to. They're not doesn't mean they have to be your best friends, but
Right.
we learn how to. We got a lot of help with facilitators and mediators and psychologists how to live with each other, because Americans aren't that good at it, And so, because we all wanted to do things our way, so we had to learn
Right.
how to figure things out, to do consensus and stuff. So we all evolved tremendously as human beings from
Mhm.
living there. And some people couldn't evolve and they quit, which
Mhm.
is fine. It's good because they didn't fit. And because you have to really be willing to grow emotionally to to be there. You have to grow up and learn
Right.
how to make decisions together and so forth.
Wow. So that's a whole nother journey that you were on. I'll have to look at that TED Talk and encourage our listeners to listen to that as well. So what's in store for Erica Elliott for the rest of your life? I mean,
Okay.
Is there something that you still have not done that you would like to do,
Yes.
or is there something that is pushing you in a certain direction that might cause you to just walk away from your practice one day and say, "This is the final thing I have to do."
Okay, I wanna tell you something funny. Um, um, when I was a bit younger, I went on Match.com and went out with a few guys, and it was disaster. I mean, it just didn't work out for me at all, and I decided, "Oh, this isn't for me." And I have a sister who's incredibly, psychic. I mean, she's been right very often. She said she knew the exact year and time season of the year when her daughter was going to find her life partner, and she was right. And so I said, Jackie, am I ever? I not that I'm looking or anything. I just I want to know if there's anything on the horizon for me. Again, I'm not looking for anything, but what do you see on your? She calls it her screen when she gets these images. She said, "Well, you're going to meet your life partner when you're 83." I
Oh
said,
my
80,
goodness.
83? Why did you pick that number 83? And how do you know I'll still be alive? And she said, because you have so many projects going on, there's no room for a partner in your life right now. You will have finished all four of your books, and you will have petered out, your practice. And then that I said, well, how do I find this person? She said, no, no, he'll find you. You don't have to do anything. Just don't even You don't even have to think about it. Just finish your projects. And so I have my third and last memoir, the trilogy. I'm halfway through it. It's about my trajectory in medicine, which is very eye-opening to will be to the reader. And then the fourth book, which I've already written a book proposal for, is called The Medical Detective, and the subtitle is Simple, underline, Simple Solutions for Solving Medical Mysteries.
Well, this has been great. Thank you, Dr. Elliott, for joining us. We'll have to have you back on the program soon. You take care. What a great conversation. I hope you all enjoyed this episode of A Journey Through Nature and Science with Dr. Erica Elliott. Dr. Elliott has written her memoirs in 2 books, with a third on the way. The first one is From Mountains to Medicine, and the second one is Medicine and Miracles. You can go to her website at ericaelliottmd.com. We also have a blog page dedicated to Dr. Elliott on our podcast website at natureandsciencepodcast.com. On our next episode, it's all about how to care for stroke patients. Dr. Kenneth Monahan is a world renowned expert in stroke rehabilitation with over 32 years of clinical, academic, and research experience. Be sure to join us for this important discussion. As always, stay safe, share happiness, and remember, never stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing.